The wedding hall in Lagos went silent the moment the old man in the faded brown Agbada stepped through the door, because Chief Adenka Fashola, billionaire owner of half the shipping docks in Apapa, took one look at his face, dropped his glass of champagne, and collapsed into his chair as if the floor beneath him had opened up. Under the bright afternoon sun pouring through the tall windows of the Fashola family estate, nobody in that room understood what had just happened, except for one trembling young woman standing near the cake table in a borrowed blue gown. Her name was Adaisy, and she had spent the last 8 months being quietly humiliated by her husband's family for being poor, for having no title, for having a father nobody had ever heard of. Now that same father was walking toward her, and the most powerful man in the room looked like he had seen a ghost. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that the truth always finds its way into the light, tap that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories so you never miss what happens next. Now let's go back to where it all began. Adais grew up in Mushin, in a small house with a tin roof that rattled every time it rained. Raised by a father who worked with his hands and never spoke much about his past, Paubina Eze was a quiet man, gentle in a way that made people underestimate him, the kind of man who fixed generators for neighbors without asking for payment and who read newspapers cover to cover every single morning with his tea. Adais never questioned why her father kept an old, weathered leather briefcase locked in his room, or why he sometimes stared at old photographs late at night with an expression she couldn't name. She only knew that he had raised her alone since her mother passed, and that he had done it with more love than most children with 2 parents ever received. She met Tobena Fashola at a small bookstore in Yaba, where she worked part-time while finishing her accounting degree. He was warm and funny and utterly, unlike the spoiled rich boy she expected a Fashola heir to be. He fell for her laugh before he ever learned her surname, and by the time he found out she lived in a 2-room house in Mushin, he told her it didn't matter, that he loved her and only her. Adais believed him completely, and for a while, that belief was enough to carry her through anything. What she wasn't prepared for was his mother. From the very first meeting, Chief Fashola's wife looked at Adais the way one looks at mud on an expensive carpet. She asked pointed questions about her father's occupation, her family's properties, her mother's maiden name, searching for anything that would prove Adais wasn't worthy of the Fashola name. When Adais answered honestly that her father was a retired mechanic living modestly in Mushin, the older woman's smile turned thin and cold, and from that day forward, Adais became the daughter-in-law who was tolerated rather than welcomed. The months after the wedding were the hardest of Adaisy's life. She was seated at the far end of family dinners, spoken about in French when the family didn't want her to understand, and reminded constantly, in small cutting comments, that she had married up and should be grateful. Chief Fashola himself rarely acknowledged her presence, always too busy, always too important, treating her the way one treats furniture that came with the house rather than something chosen. Tobena tried to defend her, but his voice always seemed to grow quieter in his father's presence, and Adaizy learned to swallow her hurt, rather than cause more tension in a home that was never fully hers. She called her father every week, careful never to let the sadness slip into her voice. Paubina always asked the same question, "Are you happy, my daughter?" And she always answered yes, because she couldn't bear for him to know how small his little girl had been made to feel inside that mansion in Ikoyi. Her father, in turn, never pushed, never pried, simply told her that a woman's worth was never determined by the people who couldn't recognize it, and that truth, like morning light, always eventually arrived. The wedding anniversary celebration was supposed to be a simple family gathering, a quiet afternoon lunch to mark 1 year of marriage. Chief Fashola had insisted on inviting business partners and society friends, turning it into another opportunity to display the family's wealth. Adais had asked, gently and hopefully, if her father could attend. Her mother-in-law had scoffed openly, saying it was probably better if he didn't come, that certain people simply did not belong in certain rooms. Adais had cried alone in the bathroom that morning, wiped her face, and walked out smiling because that was what she had learned to do. Paubina arrived anyway, dressed in the same brown agbada he wore to church every Sunday, carrying nothing but a small, wrapped gift and the quiet dignity that had defined him. Adizi's entire life, he walked through the grand doors of the Fashola estate under the golden afternoon sun, past the uniformed staff, past the gleaming cars parked in rows outside, and into a hall filled with Lagos's wealthiest families. And that was the moment Chief Fashola looked up, saw his face, and collapsed. The room dissolved into chaos, servants rushing forward, Tobena catching his father before he hit the ground. Gasps rippling through the crowd of stunned guests. When Chief Fashola finally opened his eyes, pale and shaking, he stared at Pa Obina as though staring at a memory he had buried for 30 years. And in a broken whisper he said one word, Obina. It turned out that decades earlier, before the shipping empire, before the mansions and the private jets, a much younger Adeyinka Fashola had been a desperate, failing businessman on the verge of losing everything, including his family, to crushing debt. He had gone to a moneylender's warehouse to beg for one final loan, only to be caught in a fire that broke out from a faulty generator. Trapped beneath a collapsed shelf, choking on smoke, he would have died that night if not for a young mechanic working nearby who heard his screams, ran into the burning building, and pulled him out with his bare hands, suffering burn scars on his own arms that he carried quietly for the rest of his life. That mechanic disappeared into the crowd before Adeyinka could even learn his name, and for 30 years, Chief Fashola had wondered about the stranger who saved his life, the man he owed everything to, the debt he could never repay because he never knew who to repay it to. Now that stranger was standing in his own home, revealed at last to be the very father of the daughter-in-law he had dismissed, disrespected, and made to feel unwelcome for an entire year. The silence in that hall was unlike anything Adizi had ever witnessed, as her husband's father, the untouchable Chief Fashola, rose on trembling legs and walked across the room to kneel before her father, right there on the marble floor in front of everyone, thanking him with tears streaming down a face that had never once shown vulnerability. He turned to Adiz next, and for the first time in a year, looked at her not as an unwanted burden but as the daughter of the man who had given him a second chance at life, apologizing for every cold word, every dismissive glance, every moment he had failed to see her worth. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who believes that true character always rises to the surface eventually, because stories like this deserve to reach as many hearts as possible. Before we reach the end, if you're watching this and you believe kindness always finds its way back to the giver, type the words "second chances" in the comments below, so we know this story reached you. In the weeks that followed, everything in the Fashola household changed. Adizi's mother-in-law, humbled and ashamed, began inviting her for tea, asking about her life with genuine interest for the first time. Chief Fashola insisted Pa Obina move into a comfortable home nearby, an offer the old man gently negotiated down to simply visiting more often, because he had never wanted riches, only the safety of the daughter he raised. Tobena held his wife's hand at every family dinner now, no longer needing to whisper apologies for his family's coldness, because that coldness had finally melted into something resembling love. Adiz often thought back to her father's words, that truth always arrives like morning light, and understood now that he hadn't just been comforting her. He had been promising her, quietly, patiently, the way he always did, that her worth had never depended on anyone else's recognition of it at all.